speaker for today. She is AJ Glasser. She has covered games for many years, including stints at GamePro, where I also worked.
Yeah.
So we're like
back when there was a
buddies. And she's covered especially social, mobile, and casual games, which is fairly unique. There aren't a lot of games journalists who focus on that, so she's really an expert, I think, more than almost anybody else writing about games. And she's currently a developer relations person for Facebook, so she's still dealing with a lot of mobile, social, casual games. But I asked her to come and talk about the wide, crazy world of game journalism to give you a flavor of what you might face if you're working on your own game and you want to get some press attention. She's going to walk you through all that. So welcome, AJ.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to do a quick poll, not like the video game poll, but how many of you read news every day? Raise your hand. How many of you read that news from a newspaper or a news publication like the New York Times, The Economist, Wall Street Journal? Raise your hand. Just one, okay. How many of you get it from a news aggregator like Google News or Yahoo News? Okay. And how many of you just look at your Facebook feed or your Twitter or Reddit to get your news there? Very good, okay. I think I put the right slides together. So the way this is going to work is I'm going to walk you through a quick history of games journalism and really how it got going and how it evolved and where it is now. Then we're going to talk about the system of journalism itself as an industry and how that intersects with the industry of games, which might give you an idea as to why the line kind of blurs between games journalist and someone that works in the games industry. And then I guess I'll just leave a lot of time for questions. Just off the top of your head, how many of you can think of questions you would like to ask me? On the backs of your minds, raise your hands. Great, 2 minutes for question time. One for you and one for you. Got it. All right, let's get started. So the early days of games journalism were mostly about marketing. So the Atari Age magazine, the old school Nintendo Power issue 1, you're looking at screenshots. You would occasionally get walkthrough pieces, mostly cheat lists back when cheats were kind of a big deal. They would take up the last 4 and 5 pages of these magazines. Nintendo Power actually ran comic books in the back, like the old Metroid and Super Mario Brothers comics, but not the same as cheats. As far as journalism goes, they weren't really journalistic publications. I mean, there wasn't any room for analysis. You really didn't have news reporting of any kind. They weren't even really talking about launch dates for games or release dates yet, just because that was a closely guarded secret by manufacturers. And freedom of the press, total joke. No such thing. So this persisted well into about the 90s, and then we get to kind of between the rise of the internet and also the gloss and glam of pop culture. I don't even know how many of you were old enough in the 90s to read, but I'm not going to embarrass myself by asking you. These magazines, Games for Windows, Electronic Gaming Monthly was the really, really big one, Edge magazine in the UK, they were more driven by feature stories. And so these are interviews with game developers. These are longer analysis pieces on games that were significant or felt significant. You even got in this time frame, actually in the late 80s too, you got real journalists and film critics writing about games from time to time. Did anybody know that Roger Ebert once wrote a game review? Did any of you know that? Late 80s, you can actually look it up. It's not his best review, but it was a review by Roger Ebert of a video game. These magazines were owned by publishing houses, so Ziff Davis, Future US, UK, and in that system, it was more like real journalism. You had a newsroom with a staff, and they were paid to cover games news. They were not directly paid by Nintendo or by Atari to write about it. Also, Atari didn't exist anymore, so no problems there. You also saw a lot of analysis and some more financial reporting, so like sales of video games, and you also started to see release date news coming out then, or at least timeline windows. More data was available and being made public to consumers, again, from a consumer perspective. It's still really dependent on game publishers and developers, though, not just because they bought ad space in these magazines that drove, the actual production of said magazines, but also for hardware and software review content. In those days, you could not just pick up a game and review it if you ever wanted to. Someone sat in the lava. Oh no. Sorry. So there was some freedom, but it was still very much the classic form of journalism, which is advertising-driven and dependent on the tech companies to supply the tech to be reviewed. About a third or less of every magazine was going to be news content, by which I mean release date news. you almost never saw stories about so-and-so quitting Twitter, or about a mom like playing a game to the exclusion of her child care so that her child like died or something tragic. You actually also did not see too many stories about kid shoots up school and video games are blamed. That really didn't kick in until after Columbine. So, you know, this time period could be a mixed bag. In the latter half of this time period, like 2000 to 2005, was really the rise of the internet. And this is where we got sites like GameSpot and Kotaku and Joystick. And these sites sort of were, you know, the internet was new and glamorous, but also they saw an opportunity to really cover news in a way that magazines couldn't. And suddenly you're finding out breaking stuff about this game is going to miss its launch date, or this game is going to debut at this hardware show. And that really, you could see the response of the audience in a way that you couldn't with magazines. In magazines, you got fan letters, and maybe you remember this from GamePro, but people would send in like really sad cartoon drawings of their favorite video game ever. Yeah, you scan them in, and you know that was really the only sentiment that you had back then. But now with these websites, not only did you get people that, you know, were commenting on your stories and saying how excited they were, or how angry they were, or what they wanted to know, but you also had the traffic, and you know, thousands and thousands of people clicking on a story. That's why I put the little network thing at the bottom, because you would look at it like, oh my god. And the news cycle was 24 hours now. Things that happened in Japan, you could find out about them now and not 3 months from now. It was amazing. So speed of reporting split up, and we started to really see a divergence between magazine-style sites that at the time were more glossy. Gosh, this slideshow's old. GameSpot stopped being a magazine a while ago. But the magazine kind of feature-style coverage versus the like AP-style news coverage, which is really what we see today, especially with the rise of community-sourced aggregation and feature sites like Reddit and NeoGAF. Those aren't even really news in the traditional sense, the way that most reporters understood it, but rather just community sites where people would find things out, write a quick line about it, maybe not even include a link to the source, and then the actual story would just be the post itself on NeoGAF or on Reddit, thread on Reddit. So that blew the minds of journalists across the globe, both inside and outside of the games industry. We also have some hobbyist sites around this time that were getting bought up. So Fox bought IGN. CBS bought GameSpot, AOL owns Joystick. So most of your favorite game sites are owned by somebody. Kotaku is still owned by Gawker. Gawker is still technically independent, but like all sites on the internet, it too, like the magazines, became dependent on ad space, on traffic, on external factors that kind of govern how news is covered and created on these sites. Stuff that Reddit doesn't have to worry about. So you will see wildly divergent coverage now in magazines, on sites like Joystick and Kotaku, and also on Reddit. Like, it'll be like 3 different conversations about the same release date. Amazing stuff. So where does games journalism really fit? So we have a unique industry. Games is something between culture, technology, and marketing. And so the journalism that covers it can fall into one of those categories or all 3. So how many of you know the magazine Kill Screen? Has anyone heard of it? Okay. Where would you say off the top of your head Kill Screen goes? Just shout it out.
Culture.
Culture? Okay. What about Wired? Who reads Wired? Okay, where does Wired go?
Technology.
Are you sure
Marketing.
it's not culture? Marketing, culture, you know, it's a little bit weird. Okay. Who can think of off the top of their head a marketing magazine that covers games that is not currently shut its doors? Really hard question to answer. Official Xbox magazine. So that's one of the last holdouts. Everyone else, Official PlayStation magazine, I believe, is shut down. Nintendo Power is gone. GamePro is gone, although I think, where were we? Were we in culture, were we in technology, were we in marketing?
Wow.
Yeah, I don't even know. Like, it went through a few changes there. When I was working at GamePro, we had an editor named John Davison who wanted to make the magazine culture. He wanted to be more about feelings and thoughts and analysis pieces, and we ran some really cool stuff, like Lee Alexander's piece on Bayonetta, and how that relates in gender politics and things like that, and a piece on the green games and like the actual effect on the environment that games packaging had. I mean, that was the kind of stuff you would never see on Kotaku, please. And I can say that because I wrote for Kotaku and I never wrote it, so. It's really hazy where games journalism goes. It's all at once, all 3 of these things together, combined, even on Reddit, because you will see people on Reddit responding to elements of each of these things. What is the last gaming thread someone remembers reading on Reddit this morning? Just shout it out. No one remembers what they read this morning? Wow.
I don't remember
What?
I guess I was looking at Minecraft and the releases that they're going to do.
Oh, upcoming releases of Minecraft?
Yeah.
Okay. So what was the top comment that was upvoted? Can you remember that one?
Probably a joke.
So that would take this news and move it into culture and less technologies, because the comment actually became part of the story because Reddit could do that. So when we talk about this, we're like, well, wait a minute, what is games journalism? So up here is a super old headline from 2009 about Resident Evil 5 and the great debate about race in video games. Does anybody remember what that was? No one? Okay,
what
great.
Resident Evil 5 was? Or?
Oh.
Burn. Yeah?
Oh yeah, you were in Africa and you only shot African zombies, right?
Was that the news, or was that what you think the news was?
I think, I don't remember it, but I was pretty sure there was some controversy.
See, this is why Reddit becomes important. It's way easier to remember things in culture if it's aggregated on a community site. And this headline doesn't really cover what happened. Just real quick footnote. It was Tracy John. I believe she was writing for MTV, the multiplayer blog, which is now gone. She was interviewing other games journalists. She interviewed Ngai Kroll, who was an African American. She asked how he felt about the Resident Evil trailer that had just come out. It was like the earliest footage, which shows Chris Redfield, a white man, shooting zombies in Africa. Those zombies were black. And he just mentioned in an offhand comment that he felt that that imagery sort of dovetailed with America's like culture of race relations and racial tension. And people went insane when they read that quote. It got repeated on Kotaku, it got repeated on Joystick. The comments were wild. And so suddenly what became just a simple quote in Tracy John's story became Ngai Kroll says, this thing became this headline, which I believe ran on the New York Times. So yeah, things have a way of running around. Celebrity Corner. Atari Age interviews Pac-Man. This was literally a joke interview that ran in an issue of Atari Age where someone interviewed the actual Pac-Man. And he actually had answers. Like, he actually talked. He didn't just respond to everything as waka 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 waka, which to me would have been how to do that joke, but Atari Age didn't get it. Who recognizes the image at the bottom? What is it? Shout it out. Yahtzee Zero Punctuation Reviews. Is that games journalism?
More entertainment.
Raise your hand if you think it is. Raise your hand if you think it's not.
Well,
Okay.
Sometimes analyzes stuff.
Sometimes, not all the time.
Yeah.
He rages at it.
It's more similar to something like The Daily Show. It's like kind of, but it's more entertainment, like comedy. It's more like jokes.
See how hard it is to answer this question about when something counts as journalism, when something doesn't. Can journalism be funny? Yes.
Yeah.
Sure. Can analysis be funny?
Yes.
Is making fun of someone and analyzing them?
No.
Depends. It depends on who's doing it, and it depends on to what point and purpose. And this is really what we get into with the system. The whole purpose of journalism, you'll see it at the bottom, is to take information from sources, produce content that goes usually onto a website. We're going to pretend that magazines are pretty much dead. No point in carrying that one out any longer. And the purpose of producing this content is for the readers. And so what shapes the information, what makes it newsworthy, are actually the readers and the sources. Because the readers will tell you what they want to know, or what they want to hear, or what they're thinking about. And so that kind of governs what it is that you go seek out, or what information you filter from a source to produce the information that goes on the website. You'll notice right here in this screen that there's nothing that really intersects with the games industry. Games industry is driven by game developers because, hey, if you're not developing games, there are no games, and we have no industry. It's true that there's a lot more things that go into that, you know, publishers and financial analysis. I included investors just because you kind of can't develop games without some kind of money coming in, and you can't always bootstrap right out of the gate. Kickstarter's awesome, by the way, but it's not the golden solution to funding. So you have game developers that produce games, and the games go to players. And these two systems do not seem to intersect. So why is it so confusing to know? Would you say that Yahtzee is part of the games industry?
Yeah.
Would you say he's part of the journalism industry?
Yes.
Okay, what about me? Am I part of the journalism industry? Am I part of the games industry?
Yeah.
Why? Did I ever make a game? Where do I fit in this, this relationship when these lines don't intersect? So there's a lot of confusion about that, and it kind of leads to blurred lines. You have Ed NDK 2 weekends ago, 1 weekend ago, I lost track, there was a panel on games critics, and they were all up there talking about games analysis and being a games critic. Every single person on that panel has made a game, or 2, or 3, and sold them for money. Does that mean that they have to stop being journalists and that they are now game developers? Like, where are the lines here? Yes, that was really kind of a boring panel. So here's some lines that I just kind of drew, because sometimes your investors are the sources. A lot of what I did when I covered social and mobile was talk to investors, because in 2008, 2009, that's where investors wanted to put their money. And you had these gigantic mergers and acquisitions announcements, like Zynga going public, or Disney buying Play-Doh, or EA buying Playfish, totally different company than Play-Dumb. Just remember that. So investors became sources for journalists. Players sometimes become sources for journalists, especially in the context of Reddit, because you will see a thread on Reddit sometimes of someone that caught a screen grab of something beyond 2 souls. Who remembers a Reddit thread about that recently? Very clever Redditor figured out a way with a debug unit to get to see Ellen Page's character model naked. This made headlines, y'all. This was news in as much as the games industry decided it was. And that came from players, very clever players. The readers are usually the players a lot of the time. Sometimes the investors are also the readers. So these lines, these yellow lines, kind of show how the line blurs, and we're not always sure where it is. There's one really important line that's missing, though, and that's the game itself. So ideally, this is what most games journalists strive to do. Certainly when everyone starts out, everyone I've ever met, everyone I've ever mentored, always thought, well, all I have to do is play the game, and then I can write about it, and that's all I need to do. And for a long time, that was true. In Atari age, it was certainly true. In Edge magazine, it was mostly true. You might want to interview the developer, but you don't have to. But now, could you get away with this? Like, if you did this, do you think that you would make the front page of Joystick or the top of Reddit? Why not? You tell me, because you haven't said a word.
Because you have to be a credible source, and anyone can just go out and play the game and form those opinions. So why should anyone listen to you at that point?
Why shouldn't they? Are you not credible? You did play the game.
But since there's a lot of other people doing it who did interview the developers, why would we listen to the person who did not?
I have no idea. Neither do the magazines, which is why they keep dying. So it's not always clear where the lines are. And at the end of the day, the most important part to remember when I talk to game developers is that if you think of these systems as independent from each other, that a journalist depends on their readers to shape the information that they're getting, and the information that they're getting can come from anywhere, from a player that never interviewed the developer, or from the developer himself or herself. It becomes overwhelming. There are a lot of ethical problems that sometimes come up. What if you worked on a game? Should you write about it? Would that be journalism? Would that be fair? Would that be right? I mean, no one knows more than you, but at the same time, can you really be unbiased? And what does unbiased even mean? So this was a really difficult conversation. In journalism, we talk about the myth of objectivity. The idea is that we are all objective, but we know in real life that is actually physically impossible for most human beings to be. The best we can do is interview, interview side A, and interview side B, and side C, if we can find it, present all the information and let the reader draw their own conclusion. That gets harder and harder to do in the modern age, because there's side A, B, C, D, Reddit, NeoGAF, every side, and you can't report on everything. And everyone has an opinion, and everyone has the same access to and distribution of information. And so you get a little lost. So I tell game developers that always kind of feel that anxiety, feel that pressure about, do I have the right to write about my own game? Should I talk to a reporter about this? Should I just skip the reporter and talk straight to my players? I always say, relax and make a game that people want to play. Don't worry about the rest. And I also tell young game developers, how many of you watch Penny Arcade TV? Anyone? Has anyone seen Strip Search? Okay, so I was on one episode of that, and I was very clear to tell the contestants that I was not their friend. Reporters are friendly to you. They want information from you. Most of them, in fact, are probably video game players, and they enjoy video games. But they're there to get information for their readers. They are not your friend. Although, you know, outside of work, anything happens. But in the context of you make a game, and you want to share it as information, who does that matter to most? Not the reporter, just the player. That will probably simplify your lives quite a bit. Meanwhile, how many of you actually want to be games journalists? Don't be shy. I won't dash your dreams to the floor. You owe your readers, and your readers are lots of different people. They are people that hate Animal Crossing. There are people that love Animal Crossing. They are rabid and uncontrollable, and boy, can they be really mean without thinking about it. But you owe them. You do not owe Ken Levine. Ken Levine's a cool guy, I'm sure. His wife is very lovely. He makes some pretty awesome games that sell a lot of copies. He's not the person you're there to serve, is he? So that makes games journalists' lives simpler, is that you are not here to please game developers. You are not here to fan out over Hideo Kojima. I did that one time, but I was off the clock, so it's okay. You are here to get information because you owe it to your readers, and you are competing with every other person out there that has a computer. So try to remember that and keep sight of it, and not fanboy, fangirl out over your favorite game developers. So at this point, I left it open entirely to questions. Does anybody actually have any right now? Just the two people from before. Okay, yeah.
Are you familiar with the whole Diablo 3 debacle with all the news that went around in that game?
I know a lot of things that went around Diablo 3. Which one are you talking about?
Just the general negative backlash and the gossip around with the developers being bad sports about it, and just kind of the pressure it put on them.
Do you know that story could have run at any time in the last 5 years and would still be accurate?
Yeah.
That's how general that outline was, and also this game has been in development for a long time. Suffice to say, I'm probably not aware of the specific instance you're talking about. I do know that that game has been getting heat since the day it was announced, for not being out fast enough, for not being cool enough, for being too different from the previous Diablo, for being too much the same as the previous Diablo. Which problem did the developers instigate this time?
Well, just in general, you could talk about the pressures that kind of negative journalism puts on games, or what you think about in general that problem. Or
how many of you do not buy a game unless you've looked up the Metacritic score? Raise your hand. Okay, so most of you don't care about numbers. How many of you do care about review scores? Curious. Sort of. Okay. Do you know that most investors do not care about the actual review? They only care about the score on Metacritic. So at EA, and I assume also at Activision Blizzard, they will look at the Metacritic score for a game, and based on those numbers, they will cut funding, or not give bonuses, or not greenlight the sequel or the spin-off. That is how they run their businesses, because, well, you can't just throw money away on games that aren't making money. And the theory is that a game that does not score high will not make money. But then think about the reviewers. And who do they owe? Do they owe the board members anything? No, they're there for their readers. They want to know, what do the readers want to know? Why do any of you read reviews? Is it to know if the game is good?
Find out if it's something we would be interested in playing.
Okay, it's to figure out whether or not you would play the game. Does it tell you whether or not to buy the game? I'm not asking if you pirate, but I'm just saying. So if a journalist is trying to please a reader, and they think that the reader's not going to like the game, they're probably going to give it a low score. And if there's been a lot of controversy around a game, it's kind of very hard, even for a normal person, never mind a journalist who's got horrible deadlines and mean editors and no money, by the way. We make almost no money. Just get that out of your head right now if you think you're going to make any money. Yeah, it's hard to pull back and think, wait, Diablo 3, maybe I can just forget about all that controversy and I can just play this game and tell you whether or not I honestly liked it. Yeah, that never happens. They usually have to bring up all the stuff that came before it because they are trying to outcompete the people that are going to go play it and then just write about it. So it does have an impact, but it's not a direct one-to-one. It has to filter through a couple layers. You and then you.
Is there also some buying of reviews on Metacritic? Kind of heard that may be a problem, and wouldn't that also skew the scores towards more positive? So
if I'll put it this way: if a publisher could buy a score, don't you think EA would have done that by now? Completely buy up the entire score on Metacritic. That said, you are right. There are some influential relationships there. I can only tell you what I've seen happen firsthand. I can't tell you about what I haven't seen because you don't know what you don't know. I did once watch a publicist talk to a small site in France that it was like a fan blog run by 3 people and was very unhappy with their Metacritic score because they scored it. Only 4 outlets reviewed this game, by the way, and one of them was the French site, and they gave it a 20%. And I watched this publicist threaten, cajole, and finally offer to fly all 3 of them to some really exclusive review event in Ojai, or some really nice place in California, resort style. And that score suddenly went away from Metacritic. Now, did he talk to Metacritic also, or did Metacritic decide to get rid of it because that fan site was just 3 dudes that had no traffic? You don't know what happened there, but I did watch this person behave as though they had some power over it, and knew that this person's job also depended on a score being higher than it was originally. Still not a great game. I wouldn't recommend it. That's why no one played it and no one reviewed it. Yes?
You're saying that the reviews are for the readers. It often, when I'm reading a review, it seems to be more about what the reviewer thought of the game.
Why do you think that is?
Well, they talk about how they played it and what their opinions were, and like if they would play it again. You know, it's all about. It's sort of. I almost never see a review that says these kinds of people will like this game, or if you're like this, you'll like it, or most people.
Mostly because you're assuming, I think, about people, right? If you play a game, can you honestly say whether or not your mother will like it?
A bit.
What about my mother? She's a mom like your mom, so they're clearly the same person, right? See the problem? Like, you can try to form an assumption about these kinds of people will like this game. But when you try to form that assumption, I mean, what do you really know about these kinds of people? I'll give you an example. I reviewed Batman Arkham Asylum. Not Arkham City, but Arkham Asylum. I have read a lot of Batman comics. I am not a Batman aficionado. I honestly couldn't distinguish between Silver Age and Golden Age without having to look it up. I am not a legit Batman fan the way 4 of my other coworkers were. However, I was the fastest writer. We were on deadline, and we were going to get out competed by joystick, so I had to hurry. That's why I got the review. Did my review help people understand whether or not they should buy that game? Like, probably none of you read it, so I can't actually directly ask you. But I will say it was good enough for most readers because I was reflecting my experiences. I did try in a couple places to say, if you like the 90s cartoon with these voice actors in it, you will probably appreciate X, Y, or Z. But at the end of the day, think about it. It was a Batman game. The people who were going to buy it already bought it probably before I even laid hands on it. And the people who are going to hate it or say, it's not really Batman, had already taken to Reddit to say that. I think Reddit was around back when I wrote that review. Maybe it was NeoGAF. I think Reddit was around. But assuming that people have already made up their mind, I can't necessarily assume which direction they went in. I can only tell them what I know based on what I did. And that may help them make a decision. And more importantly, it will help me because they're going to go read my review and immediately go into the comment section and call me an idiot because I missed this or didn't get this or clearly I don't read Batman comics. Or they're going to read all the good stuff I said, jump into the comments and say, man, did you see this part? This part was cool too. And they're going to want to get on the same wagon with me. And I win because my traffic goes up, my comments are up, and my editor is happy because there's more traffic, so that means more people are looking at ads, which means money comes into the site and I get paid at the end of the day. I was not paid to say I liked Batman or hated Batman. That was not necessarily what my job was, but my job was to connect with the reader in a way that made them engage with the story. And so you find that you can really do that when you talk about yourself. Internet is all about the self. It's kind of why I went to work at Facebook. Any other questions? Yes?
I've kind of noticed with the review scores, especially on big sites like, I don't know, IGN or GameSpot maybe, that's still around.
It is.
Yeah, like more hyped on franchises usually get higher scores than like more experimental, like offshoot games. And like, you know, more recent example, Pokemon got a 9 out of 10. Or like Halo 4 when that came out got like a 9.4 on IGN. And that blew my mind because it was like, I don't know, I'm just trying to say like, why?
It is
doesn't
very...
seem impartial.
Pokemon's really good.
Pokemon is good to its credit. I didn't play Halo 4, so... You're adding to it?
Yeah, just it's like the same vein. Like GTA 5.
Same thing, yeah.
Also, yeah, it
It's-
got like incredibly high reviews, and also like kind of sensationalism about it. It's like this is the best game of our generation. It will define this group of it, and it's like
Yeah, we've heard those. I may have even written something like that at some point. Can't say that I didn't. We all got to make a buck at the end of the day. It is very hard, and I once sat in a room and argued until I was blue in the face with a man who outranked me by both 10 years and 4 different job positions, that Kingdom Hearts 2 needed a lower score than Kingdom Hearts 1. Because I did not think Kingdom Hearts 2 was as strong a game as Kingdom Hearts 1 was. And I felt passionately about this. I played both games, I reviewed Kingdom Hearts 2, and I wanted to give it an 8.5. Kingdom Hearts was given a 9 out of 10 by that site, by the guy I was arguing with, and he said that I was not making the right decision by scoring this game lower than it's the previous game. And I wanted to know why. He goes, well, people are going to love it. And I said, but it's not as good as the previous game. He goes, that doesn't matter. People are going to love it. And it suddenly hit me that, yeah, you shoot yourself in the foot. If you rank that first game, if you gave Dead Space 1 like an 8 or a 9, you're screwed when Dead Space 2 comes out. Because it will have some horrible game-breaking bug in it. It will make some terrible, controversial decision about a plot point that will make people upset. But you can't back down because you gave the first game a higher score than that, and you want there to be a 3. And if you want there to be a 3, you got to give a good rating to 2, assuming 2 is not somehow egregiously awful and unplayable. So this is a really sore point in a lot of editorial bodies about what to do with games that were scored higher. And it's why a lot of review sites try to move away from scores. So Kotaku stopped giving scores when I worked there. We only listed good points in green and bad points in red, and that was it. There was no score. Do you know what Metacritic did when we started doing that? They started arbitrarily creating a score for us based on the tone of voice that the writer wrote it. That was really hard. So to troll them, I actually wrote a review that was saying bad things about a game, but in a very positive way. And so that game got a higher score on Metacritic from Kotaku. It was just so hard to watch. And there's nothing I can do about it because Kotaku and Metacritic don't talk to each other. And Metacritic is kind of a black box about how it weights its scores. And when I wrote for Games Radar, we actually started doing this thing where we would put a little box at the end with the score, 3 good points, 3 bad points, and then a specific pull quote that says, just for you, Metacritic. And they would always copy-paste that quote. Because, yeah, Metacritic is looking for that quote, and they really don't want to read your whole damn review. So we've tried to help them out a little bit. Yes?
So you mentioned that a lot of the different reviewers are giving actual scores, and it's going to, like, listing different good points and bad points.
They will keep trying
So,
to drop scores.
It's kind of like, I've read a lot of reviews, and it feels like it's very subjective. Like, so you play the game, and you say, this game was awesome because I really liked how grindy it was and how all the people online were trolls. And maybe I don't like that, so, like, maybe the reviewer likes that. So when I'm reading it, the whole review comes off saying the game's awesome, but, like, we've got different opinions on what makes the game awesome.
Did you play Mass Effect?
I did play Mass Effect.
Renegade or Paragon?
I wouldn't want Renegade.
What if I wrote a review that was only from the point of view of the Paragon? Would that tell you whether or not you like the game?
Probably not.
I mean, what would an objective review of Mass Effect really be, though? Would I have to play the game Paragon, Renegade, and Middle of the Road and write 3 reviews for you to be objective?
I feel like it would just outline points without specifically stating whether or not they were good things or not.
But at the same time, what points? So think about Grand Theft Auto 5. Is it good or bad? Just you shout it out, good or bad.
Good.
Okay. Why? Is it good because it has really great graphics? Yes? Is it good because when you put the disc in the machine and it turns on, it actually works as intended?
That's actually
Yeah, it knocks that out of the
actually a
park
big
most of the
part.
time, sometimes. Is it good because it provides social commentary about gangster lifestyle in an urban environment? Does that make it good? Does that make it important? Is it good because it's funny with its over-the-top violence? I mean, you really get into that thing, though. Like, you want to be able to tell someone, should you buy this game or not, and you want to base it on purely objective means. The game works as intended. The game is what it advertises itself to be, a violent crime fest in an urban environment. It has really great graphics, but there are 3 other games that probably fit that description that did not get 9s and 10s. I'm having trouble. What was that game on PC that was about Prohibition era something? I can't remember the name, and there might actually be 2 or 3 games that fit that description, but that game didn't get good scores. There was no sequel to that game, but it met those 3 good metrics we just talked about.
LA Noire.
Nope. That one actually got good
That one got
scores,
9s,
strangely
yeah.
enough.
That was Prohibition.
Okay, but here's another thing about LA Noire. Was that a good game? Was it good because you put it in and it worked? Because sometimes it kind of didn't work. That actually had a lot of launch bugs until after they patched it. Was it good because it was a good action-y game that, like, you run around and you shoot people? No, it was a dialogue tree. Like, that was the game, was a dialogue tree. But did you have fun?
Yeah.
Raise your hand if you didn't have fun with that game. or didn't even think that you would, so you never bought it. Yeah, see, you didn't even buy it. So it's hard. You can't really objectify good. It becomes a subjective argument as you make it. And at the end of the day, the rundown, bits and pieces, the information part of it, its launch date, who made it, what it's about, where the camera is, which system's it on. I mean, it's on. All that stuff is covered in previews. All that stuff is covered in news. It's not really held over just for the reviews to provide this beautiful, objective, complete picture of a game. You'll never really get a complete picture of a game unless you played it, read everything about it on the internet, flew to wherever it was made, and interviewed everybody that worked on it, which is why, even with games journalism, even with all the advances in games journalism we've made in timeliness, we've made in access, you'll never really get a complete picture of the game, because it's always somewhere in between all of these factors. Any other questions? In the back.
Well, the problem I have when I read reviews of games is that what we're asking is this a fixable problem? So when I read a review of games, what I really want to know about is the moment gameplay. Like, what am I doing in this game? You know, if I buy the game, what am I going to be playing? The reviews usually don't tell me that. They tell me what the story is, what annoying bugs, annoying the person who played it, and all these auxiliary things. But they don't tell me what I'm actually going to be doing when I'm playing the game. And it really bothers me. Like, is that a fixable problem, or is talking about the gameplay just not doable, or does it take too short a time for the article, or what?
It depends on the publication, I would say. A lot of previews will rely on that gameplay walkthrough. You load into the level, you're standing in a dark warehouse, there's a man in front of you handing you a gun, and you have a choice. You can take the gun or you can go this way, like really walking you through the gameplay. The idea at the review stage is that A, you've already seen that from trailers, B, someone is probably making a video walkthrough on YouTube as we speak, and then C, if you wanted to know how to play the game, wouldn't you just go look up a walkthrough? Walkthroughs have been a part of games journalism from the very beginning, from Atari age. And so I think people just sort of omit gameplay on the assumption that there are other places to get it.
Yeah, but a walkthrough doesn't tell you what gameplay. It just tells you how to beat the game, like what steps to do. It doesn't tell you the moment of it.
Why aren't you just playing the game for yourself then?
Well, because I'm gonna have to buy it first. What's the point of reading the review then? Why buy the game and read the review? What's the point?
Well,
to know how well you should like it.
Well, I mean, if you're demanding an experience, you have to pay for the experience. And if you don't know if you want to pay for the experience, the best you can do is read someone else's experience and try to triangulate that to your own opinions, because you are not that person that wrote the review. And it's not something I would think is fixable, because I'm not really confident that it's broken. That said, how many of you actually look at YouTube videos, like the Let's Play series videos? Does it inform your purchasing decision, yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. So why doesn't everybody just do video Let's Plays? Why doesn't GameSpot? Why doesn't Kotaku?
It's slow. Maybe they don't think about it.
They think about it. They are thinking about it. Spoilers, that's a good one. It is slow, you're right. It eats up a lot of server space loading up videos.
Less opinionated, usually. Sometimes I just want someone to think.
Also, where does that footage come from if the game isn't out yet? You rely on the publisher, you rely on the developer to give you early access, and they will tell you, do not record it. And if you do, you never get an early access game from them again. Yes?
They usually have to be funny, and you usually don't want any spoilers like gameplay.
That's true. Why does it have to be funny? Does it have to?
It makes the long process of watching the video easier.
So it's painful to watch a video of a game.
Yeah, because you either want to play it or you hate it. And why watch a gameplay trailer of a bad game? Like, you're gonna make fun of it. And if it's a good game, you don't want to watch it because then it's too many spoilers.
And you've just hit on why so many sites are having trouble making their advertising dollars count. So you've made up your mind before the game has even got footage at that point. I mean, really, games journalism is fighting to stay relevant in that kind of culture, where the line between player and developer is so blurry is that they can even be the same person sometimes, or work at the same place. I once saw the saddest Reddit thread. Someone was complaining about a game that they had only seen experimental footage from, and it turned out they both worked at the same large publisher and they didn't even know it. Around the corner and told his friend that he hated the game, but he didn't know that that was the guy that was working on it. Everyone's anonymous on Reddit. It's kind of hard. Really funny though. It's not easy for games journalism to stay relevant when information is so readily available and when players are empowered to make these decisions. In the days of Atari Age, they were not empowered. Games were so new and so different and so aimed at children, you know, the small young people who are, children are really indiscriminate. How many of you have watched a 3-year-old dress themselves? Yeah, 3-year-old don't care. So you didn't need to make analysis and argument, and you didn't need to worry about saving someone a $60 purchase by warning them not to buy it. It really wasn't about that, and now it is. Both because of the access of information and also because games have grown up. The first people that played games and wrote about them or thought about them or really, really liked them and drew the fan pictures, they're in their 40s, y'all. They have different needs now. And so the journalism has kind of grown up with them and tried to save them time and agony. Meanwhile, an entirely new generation has come up behind them that has no concept of having to wait for information. They are empowered to get it, and they feel like they should have it right away. Why don't we know what the launch date is? What's a game everybody's looking forward to that doesn't have a launch date?
Half-Life 3.
Yeah, why? There's a lot of rage around that from readers, like, why don't we know when this game is coming out? We have a right to know. But if you actually thought about the reality, like if you actually went to Valve, they don't know. They can't tell you what they don't know. They have no idea when this game's coming out. They would like to think, I don't know, Christmas, but that's not going to happen. Right? They try. You and then you.
I thought it was because like Blizzard got sued because they said I think it was one of the Diablo games and you gave a release date for it and it didn't come out for a really long time, so they got sued for that.
I have heard about that lawsuit. That lawsuit probably went nowhere.
I think they won though.
They won it for false
Yeah.
advertisement, or was it something else they hit them for?
I'm not sure of the details, but I heard they won and that's why no one gives out the release date anymore.
I don't think that that's necessarily 100% accurate. They won, or was it settled out of court?
I don't know the exact details.
Okay, details are important in journalism, for those of you that want to be journalists. We will Google this afterward, but I'm pretty confident that they couldn't have gotten them unless they actually signed an agreement for early access, so that would have been breach of contract. That is the easiest way to sue anybody. Side note, that has nothing to do with journalism. Breach of contract is the easiest way to get somebody. But false advertisement for a launch date, they probably would have been able to get out of that without losing. But we'll have to look that up afterward. Yes?
What about cases where they probably do know the release date, but for advertising purposes, it's usually, like I'm thinking of Rockstar does this many times with the Grand Theft Auto games. They release it first for console, at least for GTA 4, and they're doing GTA 5 too. They release it for console first, and they don't announce a PC version, even though it's already been shown running on PCs, and they're going to probably release it really soon, but they don't announce it because they want everyone to buy it on console. And then
Does Rockstar want that, or does Sony and Microsoft want that?
probably by Sony and Microsoft, but I mean Rockstar could announce, I don't know, if they could probably announce that they're releasing on PC, but somehow Sony and Microsoft could do it somehow.
How did you get this information? Like, how did this enter your mind?
Because I'm a PC gamer and I like 30 games, and
So
so
you've read something, noticed a pattern, talked to a developer.
there's a pattern and read, obviously, I'm talking with a lot of other people who are, have experienced this in the past and are excited for GTA 5 and other things and stuff.
When the console version of Grand Theft Auto 4 launched, were there bugs?
I have no idea.
What about 5? Are there bugs, for those of you that played it?
Sure.
Are those same bugs going to be in the PC version? Just, what do you think?
It'll be worse bugs.
Put that out there. There may be things that you don't know that influence that decision, and this is another problem of access. You feel like you have a right to know that, don't you, about why they don't say the PC date. Rockstar probably disagrees with you vehemently, and maybe Rockstar has an idea about when they want to launch their PC version, but for all we know, that's contingent on whether or not someone's goldfish dies before December because there's some weird office bet. Or they're trying to fix a bug that they thought might be in the final version, but they weren't able to repro it. Now they have a bunch of angry fans on a forum thread that proves the bug is there. Some poor guy is digging through the code, trying to find it and fix it.
But then why does that not happen on the console release date?
Why isn't that information public? Who knows? Like, you don't know what you don't know. And because there are so many factors that go into this, players like you, the people that made the game, the manufacturers that had to print those discs, and the people that even had to take the screenshots for the back of the box, for those of you that bought physical copies, and Sony and Microsoft, they're part of it as well. And even Steam, because if they're probably going to distribute on Steam for download, I mean, doesn't that weigh in as well? That's a whole other company that even gets into it. So you don't know what you don't know, but you have noticed a pattern. So how would you go about actually verifying your theory?
Past games, like GT4, PC version was released after the console version.
And what about that?
And it wasn't announced as, I don't know, it seems unfair to, you could at least say, yes, we're going to release it for PC, we don't know when, instead of zip.
How do you know a reporter hasn't asked that question?
I've been online and looked a lot of places, and they basically didn't even announce that they're going to release it for PC. It's only speculation.
Have you contacted Rockstar and asked?
I have not personally. I've only part of Reddit and other forums that try to solve these questions on their own.
So where in this diagram would you put yourself?
Player and reader.
Player and reader, okay. So that's another blurred line, because you feel like you have the right to this information as a player, but you've only ever participated as a reader, and you didn't actually talk to the developer itself, you went to Reddit. Isn't that interesting, though? Like, that was how you felt that you should get this information to confirm a theory that you have. It's interesting. I'm not judging. It's fine, and you're probably right for all I know, because you don't know what you don't know. But it's hazy, that line that you just put yourself in, and where you could go to get this information. Fascinating. Yes?
Would it have anything to do with, like, piracy?
A little bit more there.
Like, they want to sell physical copies because it's not as easy to distribute those online. Like, once the PC version's out, can't you download it?
The discussion of piracy would take up an entirely different talk. There may be people out there that believe that a disc is somehow more secure than a digital copy. That said, I'm pretty sure most piracy sites had access to it day one.
Well, I mean, like, maybe that's why they don't release their PC release date, because they don't want to have people waiting for it just so they can download it.
What if you were going to download it anyway? I mean, that's the other theory about, like, if you had intent to not pay for this game, wouldn't you have already done that?
I don't know. I think a lot of people are opportunists.
Okay. So whose problem does that become then? Do journalists care about that?
No.
So they would report the release date if they had it. Rockstar obviously cares about it. What about you? Do you care?
Do I care about what?
About a pirated copy coming out before your PC version?
No. I mean, I know a lot of people will pirate it, but it's a great game like GTA 5. I would probably buy it instead of pirate it.
Even if the pirated version was available first?
I would pirate it and then buy it.
Okay, thank you for being honest. So you may be onto something there, but you would have to ask who to find out for sure. Would you go on Reddit, or would you want to talk to Rockstar directly to find out for sure?
The company.
Probably. Yes?
I had a different line of questioning. So I think probably in general the culture here in this department is kind of like going to become like indie game developers.
Says the guy with the choker and the earrings.
Yeah.
Go on. Sorry, keep going.
So when you worked at Kotaku, how did they pick indie games to write pieces on? Or what in general would be your advice for getting noticed by journalists?
So my job at Facebook is developer relations specifically for indie games. My job at Kotaku kind of became patron saint of indies. Because I would just see stuff on the internet that I liked, and I would run it down because I had to write something. Kotaku used to, I cannot verify if this is still true, but they used to operate on a quota system for writers. You were assigned slots. You had to fill 6, you had to fill 5, you had to fill 2, and they were at different times of day. I had the worst 2 slots, by the way. I had 5:20 and 5:40 Pacific evening. Nothing happens at 5:20. Any day, I guarantee nothing happens at 5:20. You can wait a little while for Japan to wake up and things will happen. You can pray to God someone gets hit by a bus somewhere in New York and that you'll have something to write about. But by and large, I spent most of my last 2 hours before my deadline going around the internet looking for what was interesting that my coworkers hadn't already written about. And I would usually find myself on Rock, Paper, Shotgun. Or, gosh, what was that site? I can't remember the name of it. It's actually gone now, which is sad. But it was a chick that liked to post about indie games a lot. That was how I found Tale of Tales. So one of the things I wound up writing about for Tale of Tales was that Bible game about Salome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't even remember what that was called. Does anybody remember what that was called? I don't. I downloaded it, I played it, I tried to write about it. It's really hard to write about a Telltale game. But I tried, and people loved reading that, and none of them bought the game. So it's really hard to tell indies what to do in terms of discovery because, while it can be really great to have a reporter write about you, that doesn't translate one-to-one to someone actually buying your game. How many of you have a game right now that you would like to get discovered? Like it's done, it's finished. How many of you anticipate having a game that is done and finished 2 years from now that you're going to want to make money on? 2 years is a long time, most of you could probably do it. There is not necessarily good advice for how to make sure that that game gets discovered. If the game is good, if it is out there, if it is accessible, and it works as intended, you can get players. That is the most important thing because we are going to hope that in this system that the players would become sources for journalists and then would get written about. That said, readers are not always players, and so they might not pay you. So where would you want to be? What are the best platforms right now for distribution? Shout it out.
Steam.
Steam? I heard Steam. When you say PC, do you mean your own site or do you mean what?
I mean, downloading from your webpage can also work.
That's one way. Is that a good way to get noticed?
Yeah, that's a good point.
So yeah, it's hard. I mean, I talk to developers that are talking about being on Facebook. Many of them want to be on Steam, but Steam is a black box.
But I've got,
Yeah, what's up?
yeah, but I got stuff from Humble Bundle that I remember downloading. That didn't involve Steam.
Humble Bundle was a revelation in distribution for indies. I actually have a friend that just got a job there. She's so happy. So that is only one place, though, and even with Humble Bundle, that's going to become a scarcity because it's going to be hard to get into that. It's just one more platform that you're trying to get access to. If you are ubiquitous, if I Google the name of your game or your company and I can find you anywhere, I can find you on Reddit, I can find you on the Steam forums, I can find you on Facebook, I can find you on Twitter, that increases your chances immensely. Just having presence online that is consistent, that is easily accessible. It's not like you're trying to be all coy or cagey about who you are and what you made and why it's fun. And then if I want to get your game and if I go to where I expect to see it, your site, for example, and I try to download it, if I can download it and play it, then yay, you win. Like, that's how you make money and that's how your game gets out there because it has to be out there. And so a lot of what I tell indie developers, they're like, well, you know, I don't really know if I want to put my game on Facebook because I'm not sure people can find it. And I say, does it cost you anything extra to put, well, for example, we're launching a Unity SDK. Does it cost them anything extra to take their Unity game and put it on Facebook? And the answer is no. They don't need any code changes. So they just throw it on there, and it's one more place for people to access the game. And that increases the chances of discovery exponentially. Because now instead of just being on the site or just being on Steam, it's also on Facebook. It's also on Humble Bundle, if it gets on Humble Bundle. It's also an Indiecade. You know, getting out there is the most important thing. But what I always tell developers is finish the game. How many games on Greenlight do you think are done right now? Like playable, ready to buy, done. How many on Kickstarter are done, ready to buy? Getting out there and being out there is very important, but you have to have a product first. It has to work as intended, and it has to be accessible and easy to find. Otherwise, you don't even get to the argument about whether or not your game is good, right? Yes? Oh, they was just scratching your head. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. I will gladly release you from this prison if that's what you want.